South Sudan for the disrespect
Here we go.
that I've given them, not having any knowledge about their team or their country. So, right off the bat, I'd like to apologize.
I know nothing about basketball, but the one thing I know for sure, you cannot dismiss another team without the full knowledge of their background, of their own life experience. South Sudan came to this game as an underdog. Does not even have indoor courts, barely has enough of any clay courts to play on. It's a new nation, it's rising, a lot of things are still not in place. So to really understand the country of South Sudan, the spirit of these people, the resilience, the will to fight and to tell their story, carve their own space in the world, then you need to join this journey to just get a glimpse of what South Sudan is. This is Afrocentric. If you're here for the first time, many thanks for clicking and staying on the journey. If you're returning again, as usual, it's a big thank you because you keep us going. I'm mighty proud of these brothers and sisters, man. So join me on this journey as we celebrate the bright stars of South Sudan. Let's get on with it. South Sudan is the world's newest country, and it emerged from decades of civil war, breaking from the Khartoum government in the year 2011, largely pushed by the UN and the American government.
BBC World Service, it's 5 o'clock GMT. I'm Dee Sebastian with World Briefing.
So you can already see the connection between the American state and the new country of South Sudan. The nation of Kenya was very, very instrumental in shaping the conversation that will lead to the accord that granted them the opportunity to then go for a referendum and for the eventual secession and the birth of the nation of South Sudan. And if you need any indication, just look at the Kenyan flag and the South Sudanese flag. That tells you that these two are definitely brothers and sisters.
They celebrate their long-awaited independence, marked by 2 civil wars over 5 decades and countless lives lost.
The journey to independence was full of pain and sacrifice, obviously, with many Southerners fleeing to Uganda, fleeing to Kenya, and residing in very difficult conditions, especially within the Kakuma camp, where a huge population of refugees have been domiciled for decades to date. The lost boys of South Sudan largely came out of their journeys from South Sudan through Ethiopia all the way into Kenya, far off to Australia, to the US, to Canada, are now representing the nation of South Sudan. Children who were separated from their families, forced to start a new life from scratch, yet amidst the hardship that they went through, the dream of a better future always persisted, always stayed with them. And the result of that is evident today, that they nearly toppled a whole NBA star-studded American team. That if it wasn't for the basket by LeBron James, that America was going to eat humble pie.
Manu Ball is the most unique player in NBA history, and we're not only talking about his freakishly long limbs. Just about everybody knows that Manu was 7'6", and that just his legs were 5 feet long.
South Sudan went through decades of difficult times, and one of the sources of hope was a famous South Sudanese known as Manu Ball. I think the Westerners would call him Manu Ball, but as an African, we would call him Manu Ball. Interestingly, I had a chance to meet Manu Ball's very first basketball coach, who perhaps may be alive today or not, but when I met him at the time, he had transitioned into the Christian world as a pastor and shared many, many tales about Manu Ball. A South Sudanese pioneer in the NBA, he used his platform and resources to push for political change and support of his people to rise up against the domination of Khartoum that had persisted for years on end. His legacy obviously paved the way for the great giants of South Sudan today, the Luol Dengs of this world, whose influence far off in Britain, in Australia, and even during his NBA days in the US can now be felt in South Sudan, inspiring a new generation of South Sudanese, proud, pushing forward, resilient, representing the hope that this new nation has for the future of its children, despite the difficulties arising from the bad politics that the leadership of the country, from both political divide, have engaged in. In 2013, barely 2 years after South Sudan got its independence, the nation of South Sudan broke into a civil war, largely informed by the infighting within the top echelons of the South Sudanese government that pitted two major tribes in South Sudan, the Nuer of Vice President Riek Machar and the Dinka of President Salva Kiir's side. That conflict soon escalated into serious violence and the loss of lives in the most atrocious ways. If you traveled to South Sudan at the time, you'd be driving along the roads and the fields were littered with the lives of women, children, young men who lost their lives at the battlefront. The place was littered with armored vehicles, tanks, obviously shelled out in that insurrection within South Sudan.
Serious. Yeah.
Yet, despite that instability that nearly tore South Sudan, the South Sudanese people have remained resilient. And years later, it seems like South Sudan is slowly on the recovery path. I visited the South Sudan in 2004 for the very first time, spending Christmas there, spending the New Year. I was there for a good 6 weeks, landing in a small town center called Tombora, one of the most remote places you could come across in South Sudan. But the resilience of the people was palpable. The hope that they had, looking forward to the peace accord between Juba and Khartoum that would eventually lead to the secession of South Sudan, was very evident. And Christmas at the time for them offered a sense of peace, it offered a sense of hope, an indication of the possible. They could visualize what was seemingly soon to come. And I remember going to this football field, and the youth were there, dressed, donned in their best Christmas, the best Sunday outfits, celebrating Christmas, and New Year. Never mind, they mostly speak their own languages and a bit of English here and there. But the French phrase, bonne année, was very much in the air. The welcoming of the new year and the promise of that new year. So I traveled across South Sudan and saw a vast land that was rural, but I also saw a beautiful village in Nimule, a town called Nimule. I went to another place called Sorsiubu. I went as far off as a place called Ezo, which is right at the border of Congo and the Central African Republic. So virtually getting the opportunities to stand astride those three nations. And the wealth within South Sudan then was so evident. They had fruits all over the place. We drove through this road where The mango boulevard on the street was unbelievable. There were oranges everywhere. South Sudan is such an endowed nation. I went on to another county called Nimule. The beauty, the beautiful sunsets, the ease of life, the sense of promise, it was evident. And spending time with a team from the Sudan Radio Service, Michael Tombora and his team, spreading the message that peace is on the way, that South Sudan would likely become a nation that would stand on its 2 feet. To experience all that, for me, honestly, was a privilege. And I think our brothers and sisters out there in Britain, in America, in Australia, where these brothers and sisters have also found a new home, need to travel to some of these places, need to travel to South Sudan to see for themselves, to celebrate this new nation that is so full of promise, that despite the meager resources, they can challenge an NBA-studded American team. Fast forward, it's 2024. South Sudan has emerged from major conflict, become a new nation, has had a civil war, and they are now making a mark on the global scene. They are making a mark in basketball. Looking at the fans and their reactions after every game, and especially after the South Sudanese, the Bright Stars played against the US team, you can see that for them, it's not just a game. This is a fight for dignity, a representation of their homeland, South Sudan, and certainly an indication of their fighting spirit.
These guys to realize what sports does for the country. The sports is going to be the vehicle of unity.
We were able to bring people together. We're fighting for something else. We're fighting for peace. We're fighting for each other. We're trying to build as one.
American YouTuber Drew Brinsky recently visited South Sudan and brought online some amazing images of South Sudan. It's a country rich in culture, from its music and dance to its unique food. It's deeply rooted life around cattle, interacting with nature. This is what South Sudan is showing to the world. Their rawness, their agility, their talent, their culture, their cuisine, the nation of South Sudan in all its shades. Amidst all the challenges that these guys have gone through, clearly in this moment in time, basketball is a representation of hope that a young nation such as South Sudan, given its turmoil of a past, is rising from the ashes and presenting the best of its young people to the world. And the contribution of NBA in basketball in Africa, the giants of Africa, talking about Nigeria, talking about South Sudan, talking about Rwanda, now heavily also supported by President Kagame. Their role in that brotherhood cannot be denied. So this is how we must work together, go the mile together. We are still one, and the sports is the one thing that brings us together, is the one thing that must remind us that we belong. We are Afrocentric. You agree with these sentiments? You know the deal. Like, subscribe, and share. And let's celebrate South Sudan for the powerhouse that they've become, the beacon of hope that they've shown to Africa, and the resilience that they have demonstrated to the world. That you may be down today, but you sure can rise from the ashes and make a mark on the global scene. Many thanks for watching, and if you're returning, I can't thank you enough. And check out the next video. I'm out.